Whatever competent physicians or surgeons prescribe for a patient should be accepted and complied with, provided that they are adorned with the ornament of justice. If they were to be endued with divine understanding, that would certainly be preferable and more desirable. Paula. Well is it with the physician who cureth ailments in my hallowed and dearly cherished name. Baha'u'llah. One must obey the command of God and submit to medical opinion. Thou hast undertaken this journey to comply with his command and not for the sake of healing, since healing is in the hand of God, not in the hand of doctors. Abdul Baha.
So today we're so happy to have Dr. Drew Remignanti, and his topic is the profit motive in healthcare, can religion help? Dr. Drew Remignanti, MD, MPH, grew up in New Jersey and graduated from Dartmouth College in 1975. He received an MD from Rutgers Medical School in 1980. After Rutgers, Drew, an emergency medicine physician, did his medical training in Hartford, Connecticut, and Jacksonville, Florida. He spent the rest of his long career working in hospitals in New Hampshire and Massachusetts and retired in April 2020. With his extensive medical career, Drew has also lived with chronic illness since being diagnosed with ulcerative colitis at age 19. This disease led to 7 abdominal operations and ultimately to a major stroke he experienced in 1992 when he was just 38. After his stroke, he stepped back from the practice of emergency medicine for the next 5 years. During this time, Drew earned an MPH degree, Master's of Public Health, from the Medical College of Wisconsin and participated in several international public health projects focused on polio eradication and rural health center development. This work took him to the Federated States of Micronesia, Honduras, Kenya, Pakistan, Ghana, and for earthquake relief in Haiti. By 1997, he had gone through extensive rehabilitation and recovered to the point where he could return to full-time emergency medicine practice. He shares that at the time of his stroke, his neurologist told him that he might not be able to return to the demands of this work, given the severity of his stroke. However, she recognized that he would not be content unless he worked in a challenging position. So she did not discourage him from attempting to complete his full rehabilitation back to emergency medicine. This remarkable journey inspired Drew's passion for writing, leading to the creation of his debut book, where he examines how the dollar-driven decisions by administrators at hospitals, health insurance providers, and pharmaceutical companies are wielding too much influence over our medical decisions as patients, and sadly as physicians as well. So with that, I'll hand it off to Dr. Remignanti.
Okay, thank you. You could probably go to the first slide then. I'm a little bit nervous because I'm not accustomed to public speaking, and this is a presentation I put together just in the past couple of days. I haven't done it before, so there's my excuses to start. And if anything I say during the course of what I'm saying doesn't come across in a logical or understandable fashion, please feel free to ask questions at the end. And of course, I've put my email address at the end. I'm perfectly happy and would prefer to get emails either with comments or objections to what I've said or questions about clarifications. So don't hesitate to do that, please. You can go on to the next slide. So the main problem we're facing in the US and other people elsewhere have told me their own countries are starting down the same pathway. We're on an unsustainable trajectory in terms of what it's costing to take care of people in the United States. In the United States, particularly, we're spending more on healthcare as a share of the economy, nearly twice as much as the other OECD countries. Those are the 38 countries who are market-based economies, Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development. And despite spending that much, we have the lowest life expectancy of those countries. And that's one of the contributors to the lower life expectancy is that our country has one of the highest suicide rates. What I feel we're experiencing as a nation is that the patient-physician relationship is being transformed, is really deteriorating into a more superficial, more expensive, and less effective consumer-provider relationship. Having been hospitalized 15 times, I know what it means to be a patient, and I am offended when I'm categorized as a consumer rather than a suffering patient, and I'm equally offended as a physician when I'm referred to as a provider, as if anyone else could do equally as good a job as a fully trained physician. You can go on to the next slide, please. To give you a scope of the problem, these figures are changing. This top line is actually not in my book because it's fresh. I But anybody in 1920 and 2021, we spent $4.3 trillion in the US just on healthcare. We're slowly creeping up, closing in on 20% of our gross domestic product. And to put that in context, the country of Germany, which is the fourth largest economy in the world, only spent $4.2 trillion on everything in the entire country. So if you took the US healthcare system out as an economic entity, it would be the fourth largest country in the world. So that's the scope of the problem we're talking about in terms of the amount of money involved. Next slide, please. So these figures are all from 2017. We spent an estimated $200+ billion per year on what was categorized as unnecessary and wasteful testing and treatment interventions. And that's often duplicative tests that are done because you're not only consulting your own physicians, then you're coming into the emergency department and seeing a physician like me, and I'm not sure what's been done and I can't access those results. And so then I would often repeat tests that have already been done. And in that same year, in the last quarter of 2017, healthcare surpassed manufacturing and retail to become the largest source of jobs in the US. So there's a lot of people invested in keeping the system exactly the way it is. So that's why it's going to be difficult to change it. And we don't get off as not contributing to this problem. When you do studies, you find that when we receive prescriptions as patients, we only fill about a third of those prescriptions. And it's always a statistic that stuns me, because you've spent probably maybe half the day seeing me in the emergency department with the waits you have to, or maybe less of a period of time in your physician's office. And then you're finally given some instruction, a prescription, and you're only filling those prescriptions a third of the time. So we as patients are contributing to that same problem. And then when those prescriptions are filled, only about half of them are taken properly. And when I quiz people at the end of a medical interaction and say, well, what did you learn from today's visit? People are only retaining about half of the post-visit instructions. So this is contributed to that bottom line figure that in the US population, only 1% of people account for 22% of total healthcare spending, 5% for 50%. And then the remaining 50% of people are just using up 2.9% of total healthcare spending. So that's clear from that some people are getting far more healthcare than they need, and some people are not able to access the system equitably to get the healthcare that they do need. And that, I want to make the point that people think the solution for our healthcare, funding our healthcare system in the US is Medicare for all. Those same statistics are true for both the Medicare and the Medicaid population at all as well, so that we really need to get the right test done for the right people at the right time, and just putting the burden on Medicare to pay for all of it is not going to solve our problem. Next slide, please. So I was both delighted and frightened to come across the following quotes, and which I call the quiet part out loud. This first one, the top line, is the quote from in a business journal in which the speaker is the CEO of a $1.5 billion healthcare company. And she was asked, what's one conviction in healthcare that needs to be questioned? And her response was that her conclusion was people need primary care, but not necessarily a physician relationship. She goes on, I didn't quote, the whole quote goes on, she says, we need to develop the ability to determine consumer-driven wants. And so again, the business people in healthcare are looking to find out what they can sell you, figure out what you want and what they can sell you. And so we need to have better executive level decision-making at all levels. Another guy, the second quote is from a gentleman who was the chief experience officer at a several hundred physician large medical practice in Ohio. And he said he wanted a total cultural transformation. He wanted people to feel like they were in a church-like environment. He concluded by saying he wants that Disney-like experience, the Ritz-Carlton experience. I'm always offended when people try to compare the suffering they're going through in whatever health setting, and particularly in my emergency department. Like, when you come into my emergency department, you should go out thinking that you had a Ritz-Carlton experience. And so the I was delighted to find these quotes because then you don't have to say, well, Drew's just being, now he's acting like a conspiracist, that they're out to take advantage of us. They are out to take advantage of us as patients. That's undeniable. The frightening thing to me is that they don't feel they need to hide that information any longer. Then they're willing to be quoted saying things like this. The third line down, that's a quote from a Goldman Sachs analyst who had the courage to pose the question, is curing patients a sustainable business model? This was in reference to the very effective treatment for hepatitis C that's available now. And because it's so effective, the pool of people who have hepatitis C is becoming gradually diminished. And so they can't transmit the disease like they were able to. So the question he was asking, should we continue to invest in a business model that is eliminating disease? Compare that, for example, to back in the 1950s, when they came out with the polio vaccine, and Jonas Salk was asked in an interview, who owns the vaccine? Are you going to patent that? And his response was, the people own it. And his question, rather than is curing patients a sustainable business model, was, can you patent the sun? In other words, the idea that he would be doing this for his own personal business gain was just so distant from anything he could think of. Again, the last line shows you this, again, the scope. This is not it of the problem. This is not a quote, but this was a headline in one of my references where the CEO, if he could pull off this merger between CVS and Aetna, he would make $500 million just for closing that deal. And that's the scope of the problem. It's not a bad payday. As it turns out, Aetna and CVS did merge to the tune of $69 billion, but I couldn't determine what Mr. Bertolini made on that. Maybe he didn't make his whole $500 million, but, and I'm not saying this from a point of view of jealousy, because I think he's probably much more patient and much more obviously financially savvy than me, and I could never make that happen. But I am a adherent of a philosophy that was attributed to Bob Marley, which was that he said that money is just numbers, and numbers never end. If you need money to make yourself happy, then your search for happiness will never end. Can you go to the next slide, please? So a couple other oddities about satisfaction. So what the approach that business people are taking in healthcare is, the phrase patient-centered care is used a lot. And in a positive way, patient-centered care is care centered around what a patient needs. But the business folks have decided it's really should be centered around what the patient wants, what satisfies the patient. And a particular study in 2012 at UC Davis showed that those patients who at the end of their care reported being, or at the beginning of their care actually, showed that they reported being most satisfied with their care. They ended up having a higher rate of admission to the hospital, higher total healthcare cost, higher prescription drug costs, and here's the kicker. They ended up with higher death rates than patients who reported that they were less satisfied with their care. Now, I don't think satisfaction leads to a greater risk of dying. What I think leads to a greater risk of dying is having greater interaction with the, being admitted to the hospital more frequently and possibly unnecessarily, taking medications that might not be totally appropriate for your situation, and being pushed through the system as quickly as you can in order to maximize profit. And I was glad to hear that in the second one that the woman did not actually kill anybody, but there was a woman in Germany who was so concerned about her consumer-driven wants that she actually reached over and turned off her roommate's respirator, her ventilator, twice because the noise was too bothersome for her. She was eventually arrested for that. That's the extent of the problem, and exists on our side as well as patients feeling that we should be satisfied at all costs. Can you go on to the next slide, please? So again, I put this in as an example of how severe the problem has become. This is a business deal between Four Seasons Resort Maui and this healthcare center called Next Health. And you come in, you're a guest of the Four Seasons Resort, and you have a menu of IV drips. You can choose one of which includes an hour-long stem cell therapy session for $12,000 a session, despite the fact that the FDA has issued multiple warnings saying that it's unproven and therefore unapproved. Go to the next slide, please. So this is the way they get around that Next Health. They say, we only utilize these services for the purposes of health optimization and general wellness. We do not claim any benefits. We are able to explain to customers the science of these treatments, but it's on you to do your own research. And then the verbiage there just stuns me. The neat little sidestep from taking responsibility of stem cell infusions you're willing to charge $12,000 for, saying it's on you, the patient, to say that that's what you need. I really doubt that they can really explain the science because there is no science behind it. Next slide, please. Well, this I want to give a little introduction to this YouTube video I'm going to ask Paimani to play. The person speaking is Will Flannery. He's an ophthalmologist, and he has positioned himself on YouTube as Dr. Glaucomflecken, which is an ophthalmological term, which we don't need the reason behind that. But anyway, he puts out these videos in which he plays 2 or 3 different roles and debates with himself. And this is a 2.5-minute video, more articulating and comically summarizes what I've just tried to say.
Hey boss, here are those numbers you were asking for. We're gonna have to make some budget cuts in the emergency department. Again? They're not gonna like that. Well, what are we gonna do? We don't have enough money. A bit strapped for cash, huh? Excuse me? You know, I could help you with that. And who are you? Bartholomew Banks. Private equity. Private equity? Why don't you let me take over your emergency department? No, boss, don't listen to him. Hold on. Let's hear what the mysterious, extremely wealthy man has to say. Let me guess. Your emergency department keeps losing money. Well, yeah, but it's a community safety net. You know, it's not supposed to make money. This is America. Everything is supposed to make money. Well, we've tried a bunch of things, but with reimbursement going down, it's impossible to break even. That's because you're thinking like a physician. What do you mean? You're trying to put patient care first when you should be trying to maximize profits. Frankly, it's un-American. Well, I don't agree with that at all. Shh. I will give you more money than you've ever seen in your life. All you gotta do is let me run your emergency department. Well, what are you gonna do with it? One word. Metrics. Metrics? That's right. We set mandatory benchmarks for medical staff that are designed to make as much money as possible. Well, are the metrics supported by evidence-based medicine? Evidence-based what? Evidence-based medicine. Proof that the metrics will improve patient care. Well, I can show you evidence of my yacht. Well, what if the staff doesn't meet your metrics? Well, when we hire medical staff, we put a clause in their contract that allows us to terminate them at any time for any reason whatsoever. There's no way our physicians are going to work under those conditions. What are they going to do? Quit? Doctors have student loans. They have no transferable skills. They have no choice. Okay, then they'll just leave and work somewhere else. Oh, you mean one of the dozens of other emergency departments in the area that we also own? Oh, man. Face it, this is the future of medicine. A handful of ultra-rich individuals exploiting the altruistic tendencies of healthcare professionals in order to extract an ungodly amount of wealth from the most vulnerable members of society. I don't think I can do this. Wait, did I show you my briefcase full of cash? Where do I sign?
That's a comical take on the issue, but there's nothing in that little video segment that's inaccurate, except for the fact that the title is "It's the Future of Medicine." It's actually the present state of medicine. You can go to the next slide. So then what do we do about that problem? In that video, it's portrayed as an us versus them issue, but it's not. I think it's an us versus us, and we need to try to wrest healthcare back from the hands of business interests. I happen to believe that there are not, evil is not a force. Evil is just like light. Darkness is the absence of light. Evil acts are the absence of compassion and positive thoughts. There are no panaceas here. I think the only reason business interests can make the kind of decisions they make that are not patient-centered is because they're able to keep the patients at a very long arm length away from their own experience. So if they can keep it far enough away and make it a theoretical problem, not a real problem, then they can make business decisions. if I was put in charge of the world, let's all hope that doesn't happen. I would make people who are in any healthcare company that are making business decisions that affect the direct health of people. I would say that by law, they have to do volunteer work on the hospital ward filled with patients for the condition that they're investing in, whether it be, we used the hepatitis example earlier. So if they want to make a hepatitis drug or price a hepatitis drug, they would have to do, from the CEO on down, the whole C-suite, all the administrative folks would have to spend a session or several, ideally, helping a nurse's aide change the bedding and do direct self-care for patients suffering from that condition, so that they can know what that kind of suffering looks like. We're not going to see that day, but I think if people were closer to the suffering, they would make different decisions. I don't know how we make them make different decisions. My reason for writing the book is to try to promote conversation about just these issues and see how we can pull that off economically. I'm having some trouble with my session here today because I've written a 300-page book with 280 references, which I'm trying to condense down into 20 slides. So if I seem a little off pace here or confused in my presentation, that's again the second excuse. I'll stop making excuses. But I think the solution, or at least the first step of a solution, because there is no one solution. I think we need, if you're going to engage in the U.S. healthcare system, you need a trusted guide with you, and that should be your primary care doctor. So that relationship can't just be you go in and hope to get out of your doctor what you've decided in advance that you wanted. Like, I want a CT scan of my back for my ongoing back pain. I want an antibiotic. You have to go in and have a communication it's a trusting two-way communication. And when your doctor says something you don't understand, you have to have the courage and the energy to question that piece of advice until you fully understand it. You have to be all in on that commitment to what your treatment plan is going to be. So I see it as a true partnership, not an equal partnership, because we have different forms of expertise. My expertise is in medical conditions. You as the patient, your expertise is in exactly what you're experiencing as a symptom that brought you to me and what you would like to try to accomplish, some of which might be good, some people, when they see me in the emergency department, what they want to accomplish is they want to get an unending refill of their chronic pain medicines, which might be useful for them, but not through me as the emergency doctor supervising their use of addictive narcotic pain medications. So that may be so sometimes I have to tell the patients in the emergency department, we can't combine on that partnership, because what you're asking me to do is not what's best for you. It may be what you want, but it's not what you need for this condition. So, but we need to respect our different expertises. One of the things that's happening in current medicine is the business interests are conspiring with that, is to try to convince the patient you can do it all yourself. You can do it. Your healthcare is not a DIY condition. It's something that you're best served by having an expert guide in the U.S. healthcare, any U.S. healthcare system, particularly U.S. healthcare system, so that you get the care that you need when you need it, and you get neither more or less care than you need. Go to the next slide. So, of these 280 references, I have a number of studies that hit that first point, that it's proven again and again repeatedly that patients who end up being more engaged and knowledgeable about their medical conditions and their care, they end up being more adherent to the medical advice and treatment plans that have been proposed. And the medical advice comes from the physician, but the treatment plan has to be a joint commitment. This is our business. Our business is your health, and this is a treatment plan we've come up with together. And a fascinating number of studies that show that people who are more engaged and more adherent to their medical treatment plans, they have half the mortality rate than less adherent patients. It's not like 10, 20%. It's really, you can cut your mortality rate risk in half. Again, you have to read the book to see all the sources for that claim. The second benefit is you're less likely to get unnecessary medical care. It's estimated that 30% of US healthcare expenditures are considered wasteful, again, mounting to that same figure I mentioned before, over $200 billion annually. So by having that kind of a relationship with a primary care doctor, you'll get just the testing that's appropriate for your suffering and need at that time. And of course, if you have a good primary care doctor, you're much less likely to have to meet me as an emergency physician because, if you have an emergency, like maybe you have run out of that prescription pain medicine, which your doctor thinks is a good thing, you can call your doctor's office and they can say, well, the doctor can't see you today, but he knows you well enough. He'll write a prescription and leave it at the desk. You just need to come by the desk and pick up that prescription. Or if you have somebody maybe with recurrent urinary tract infections and needs to go on an antibiotic pretty quickly, if you come in to see me in the emergency department, that's going to be a multi-hour, multi-$1,000 evaluation, more than likely, because we're meeting for the first time. So those are the benefits from forming that kind of a partnership with your physician. Can you go to the next slide, please? So as I've been saying repeatedly, the most powerful forces in American healthcare now are committed to the idea of productivity, which is, again, another thing that offends me. We don't produce anything in the emergency department or in healthcare. What we do is we address medical suffering and we hope for a cure or at least an alleviation of that suffering, but there is no product. But every year that my work career, at the end of the year, I would have a sit down with my emergency department director. He would tell me how productive I was during the past year. In other words, was I seeing people faster? Was I getting them in and out of the emergency department faster? Was I keeping them happier? Were they reporting that they were satisfied? So the pressure is see more patients, see them faster, keep them more satisfied, and then of course never ever make a mistake. And that last one was the only one that was important to me. But again, we don't get off scot-free as patients. This one article I have estimated that only about 12% of US adults could be really considered healthcare literate, whereby they can actually obtain, process, and understand basic health information and then put it into action. 12%, so 88% of us are equivalent to healthcare illiterate. And again, the multiple studies showing the bottom line there that establishing that trusting connection with your physician to the point that you know them well. But what's very interesting when they evaluate people, it's even more important that you feel known by your doctor. My doctor knows me well, so I can trust that the advice my doctor is giving me is something that is likely to be reliable. So if you have that sense of knowing your doctor and being known by them, you're much more likely to engage in the planning of your treatment and follow through with that plan, and you have better health outcome, and you're frankly just less likely to die. We just can't do all that for you particularly well in the emergency department because we're designed for acute needs. Can you go to the next slide, please? So the overall solution, of which the partnership is just the first step, we need to somehow reintroduce compassion and ethics into healthcare. The ethics and compassion in healthcare don't, to address the second part of our talk today, can religion help? The compassion and ethics don't mandatorily need to be religion-based, but it certainly needs to embody a spirituality that is sadly in short supply in our US culture. This next quote was an interesting one I came across. This guy is a French philosopher. I haven't had the chance yet to read some of his other writings, but I was intrigued by the title of his book, which is The Little Atheist Book of Spirituality, in which he wrote the following. I'll read it. Humanity is one, both religion and irreligion are a part of it. Neither are sufficient unto themselves. Spirituality is far too important a matter to be left to fundamentalists. Atheists have as much spirit as everyone else. Why would they be less interested in spiritual life? I just love the way he said that. Next slide, please. So these are some of the, I won't read these, but these are some of the definitions that have been proposed for what spirituality means. It's somewhat of a vague concept. When I was in medical school from 1970 to 1980, we never spoke about spirituality or religious belief. Now, most medical schools have classes on what they call R/S studies, religion and spirituality studies and patient needs. But again, it doesn't have to be associated with a particular religious belief. It can be, as the atheist author wrote, it basically just a human appreciation of the values of love, compassion, and justice. You go to the next slide, please. So this, interestingly, even though we're in kind of a secular environment in the US, more than 90% of people believe that there is some kind of a higher being, and 94% people believe that their spiritual health is as important to them as their physical health. And they want that addressed by their doctors, but we don't address that. I never have. In 40 years of practice, I never asked a patient about their spiritual needs or their religious beliefs. I have occasionally had a patient make a comment, though, well, God willing, I'll get better or something like that, and I endorse that thinking. But next slide, please. So there are just tons, like hundreds and even thousands of studies on religion and spirituality. And it turns out if you attend church, if you attend religious services and you tend to follow healthier lifestyles, and you require fewer health services, and you live longer, basically, equivalent to people abstaining from actually smoking. Now, I don't believe in a God who is so insecure that he's actually taking attendance at the doors to churches, synagogues, or mosques, and then doling out disease and death on the basis of who's attending and who's not. But I think making that kind of commitment to a religion or a sense of spirituality brings in other things that we'll talk about on the next slide. On the downside, if you are religiously active, but you feel that as a basis for your religious thinking, that you feel unloved or punished by God for doing things wrong, or think that the illness you're experiencing is the work of the devil, those people have actually an increased risk of death. So what you believe has a big impact on what results you get. Next slide, please. So people speculate that it's the positive association between religious belief and other things that contribute to your well-being, such as optimism and hope, self-esteem, social support that you get through your religious activity. Those may be some of the mediating factors between religiousness and well-being. Here's an interesting study. For space reasons, I only have the highlights there. That they actually compared people they took a bunch of people and controlled for their objective health status. So they were comparing similar populations. And it turns out people who had self-rated health that was poor, they had almost 3 times the mortality rate of patients who had self-rated health that was excellent. So it actually even exceeded what the objective health measures were. So those positive, optimistic feelings, often they are religious and spirituality based, appear to be protective by themselves. I don't mean to imply that we can wish or pray or necessarily want ourselves, or it's not a Pollyannish thing. It's, it just plain exists. Study after study shows that what we believe and how we carry ourselves out in life affects our mortality. People might think I'm obsessed with death. I'm not, but the reason most of my references, or the bulk of my references, are around mortality is it's the most objective of measures. You could say, well, gee, we did this and that person reported feeling better. So how do we know if that's, really objectively so or not? But the most objective measure, of course, in medicine is, did you live or did you die? Next slide, please. So this is probably part of what contributes to a sense of spirituality and religion affecting your health in a positive fashion. You tend to have more connections with other people. This was a study from way back in 1979, where they showed that the isolated men had a mortality rate 2.3 times higher than men who had the most social connections. And for women, it was even higher, 2.8 times. So this was investigated back in 1979, shortly after George Engel developed the biopsychosocial model of disease to contrast it with the pure biomedical model of disease. And you would think that that would have gotten somebody's attention. If this was a drug that reduced your mortality rate by a third, kept you from having 3 times the mortality rate simply by connecting with other human beings, the reason it didn't get much attention is because it cannot be monetized. Can you go to the next slide, please? So, and these are the fascinating group of studies on what's the health advantage of volunteering or being of service to our fellow human beings. It turns out it's similar magnitude to health disadvantage of aging a year. So you're not necessarily neutralizing the fact that you're going to, not completely neutralizing, but for the effort you make in being of service to other people can tend to neutralize the effect of getting a year older. And at first, when I started reading these studies, so that can't be accurate. Basically, what's happening here, these people who are volunteering, they're just plain healthier, and that's why they're plain healthier to start with, which is why they have the energy and the commitment to volunteer. But that turns out not to be true, because as you get older, the advantage gets higher. And here in this last line was a couple of studies that showed that people who were actually even in the worst health had twice as large a positive health advantage than healthier volunteers. So it's really pretty stunning results. Basically, I think science is reinforcing what religion has been telling us for years, that you need to treat our fellow man with compassion and kindness and try to be of service to humanity rather than extract benefits from humanity. Next slide, please. Another one making that same point, another study that there was a 44% reduction in mortality associated with high volunteerism in a study that was actually more effective than if you were exercising 4 times a week, and almost as effective as not smoking. But we're not talking about small effects, we're talking about large effects. And it kind of reinforces that old maxim that it's better to give than to receive. Go to the next slide. I think when you look at all these studies, you can I've concluded the following 2 things. It seems that in one of life's perfect little ironies, there appears to be substantial evidence to suggest that in regards to our health, it is in our own self-interest to strive daily to be less self-interested, which I think is one of the main teachings of religion over the ages. And I think you can make a very compelling argument that for the fact that Jesus Christ's admonition to love thy neighbor as thyself, that could possibly have been the most effective pre-scientific piece of health advice ever given or received. If we only follow it. Can you go to the next slide, please? I'm a Baha'i, and the Baha'i faith, Baha'u'llah's the top quote there, basically says the same thing as Jesus's. We should deal with each other with the utmost love and harmony, friendliness and fellowship, and not let us being of different religious persuasions be a cause of conflict, but we should lead to a spirit of friendliness and fellowship. And then I have this last quote, which was one of the quotes we started with. I was happy to see that. This actually is what started me down this path of research and writing my book. My cousin, David Rutstein, who's a Baha'i also, who's actually now the Secretary General of the International Baha'i Community in Haifa, Israel. One day we were talking about health matters, as we often did. We were at Greenacre Baha'i School in Elliott, Maine. And he said, I can't remember the context in which he said it. He said, Drew, that we're obliged to follow our physician's advice. I had 2 simultaneous thoughts when he said that to me. I said, no, David, I didn't say this out loud. I thought, I got to investigate this. But my thought was, no, David, I didn't know that. My other thought was, that sounds like particularly bad and dangerous advice to me. I was 10 years into my career, or more than that, 20 plus years into my career, and I knew how badly we could hurt people by making bad decisions as physicians, and how I came close to hurting people by making not the best decisions. So then they sent me to the medical research literature saying, well, how could that possibly be good advice? And I have had other people object, like I did, by saying, well, the word competent is in there, and so we can ignore everything that's going on in the US because they're not competent. It's not a competent system. We can't get off that easy. We need to investigate. We need to have a science-based healthcare. I've probably talked for too long. Can you go to the next slide, which gives my email address? I'm really strongly encouraging people to please feel free to email me with any questions, comments, or objections to anything that I said. That's everything I want to say. If people want to ask questions, or Pimani, maybe you can.
Thank you so much for such an important topic. And that was really interesting. So if people have questions, they can put it in the chat. Could you tell people the name of your book again?
It's called The Healing Connection. You probably can't see it. It's just arrived today by UPS. The Healing Connection, I have the subtitle as A Partnership for Your Health. And if you could go to my Facebook page, there's some links to show you how you can buy it if you're interested enough to buy it. The advantage of that is the publisher is still running a 20% discount on the book and giving you the ebook for free. It is up on Amazon now, but they don't actually have books. I'm the only one who has books. Well, my publisher has books too, I'm sorry. You'll pay the list price, is so much, but the sale price is 20% off that. But this is the key thing. If you're at all like me, if you're in my generation and you prefer to read a book by actually physically holding one, as I do, you definitely take advantage of the free ebook offer, which through Amazon you'd have to pay extra for. But from the publisher, you can get the free ebook and have some kind of a reader alongside you. It's going to be a Kindle. It's anything that can carry a Kindle app. You can use the ebook on. You don't have to have a Kindle. And what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to have that by your side. And when I say something, you're going to say, that can't be right. Drew can't be right about that. Where is he getting that from? Click, boom, boom, bingo. You got the primary source. There's a couple other entertaining videos like the one I showed. So I wouldn't read. The way to read my book is with the ebook alongside, I think, unless you're an exclusive ebook reader, because then you don't need the physical book.
Great, thank you. And when we upload this video, we'll put the link to your book in the description as well. The next question is, how did you become a Baha'i, or what's your journey with the Baha'i faith?
Well, I had the beneficial advantage of being raised in a Baha'i family. My grandfather was Curtis Kelsey, who was one of the earlier Baha'i believers in the United States, and he became a Baha'i somewhat reluctantly through the influence of his own mother. He thought it was too much, he thought it was kind of hocusy-pocusy stuff. My uncle, Nat Rutstein, wrote a book about my grandfather called He Loved and Served, which addresses the issues I just referred to. But anyway, he had electrical skills and was able to go to the Holy Land, to Haifa, Israel, and install the first electrical light plant in the holy buildings of the Baha'i faith in Haifa, Israel. And so he worked under the direct direction of Abdul Baha, who was the son of Baha'u'llah, the prophet of God. So it was a unique experience for him. So there was obviously a strong Baha'i influence in my life, but one of the things I loved about the Baha'i faith, still love about the Baha'i faith, is the independent investigation of the truth. You're supposed to decide for yourself if the Baha'i faith is something that you think has validity, and you're not supposed to blindly follow the leadings of any man. So it's kind of a unique aspect about a religion. It says, use your mind, don't accept anything reflexively. And I think that's transferable to the medical setting. You're consulting now a physician, but you need to question us carefully. You're going to annoy us, and you might need to go through a couple of physicians to find one who you can communicate that with and question, well, you're telling me to do this, why is that? So the Baha'i faith says, so I questioned it because I was guided to question the Baha'i faith, and I've been questioning it all my life, even recently, back in 2014, when my cousin David said that to me. I said, that can't be right. What? That can't be right. Is there scientific evidence that says that that's the right way to go? I've become entirely convinced that there's scientific evidence that says, find a doctor, get to know that doctor well, make sure that doctor gets to know you well. Ask all the questions you need to in order to be committed all in on your healthcare. You have to be all in on it. You can't say, yeah, in the office in the back of your mind, you're saying, there's no way I'm going to do that. No way I'm going to do that. Then you get home, you don't bother to fill the prescriptions. You're just undercutting your own health advantage. So once you've done the first two steps, you've found a doctor you can work with, you've asked all the questions you have, then you need to do precisely what the plan is that you agreed on with your doctor without fail. You make a commitment to that plan, you carry it out. Medical science tells us we've cut our risk of dying in half when we do that. That's a pretty good benefit. I would have probably stopped my research pretty early if the results were coming in, well, 10, 15% reduced mortality risk, cut in half. pretty impressive. So I see, I'm kind of long-winded answer. I grew up in the Baha'i faith, but I questioned it as I was advised to do. And when it comes to healthcare, I came to the conclusion that medical science and religion are telling us the exact same thing about what to do in terms of our healthcare. And that was nice confirmation for me, because that's what the Baha'i writings tell you, is that science and religion should agree, or should be in harmony. They can't be telling you things that are completely opposite. I'm sorry, I'm going on and on. This is I don't like to talk, but this is something it's hard to get me to stop talking about.
No, it's interesting. Thank you. The next question is, what happens when you're caught in the pill trap, when you've already got so many tablets that you have in a pack and they keep adding more? This person's convinced that it's caused more issues.
Yeah, polypharmacy, they call it. We see it all the time in the emergency department. Sometimes I love it when people come in with their shopping bag full of medicines. Sometimes they come in and say, oh, look it up. The hospital knows what I'm on. No, they don't necessarily know what you're on. And then you go through the shopping bag full of pills and you find 3 or 4 are the exact same pill. And I say, are you taking all of these? Oh, yeah, well, yeah. So there's duplication sometimes. And once a medication is started, there is a pressure to continue it without re-questioning, do I still need to be on this? If you have the relationship with if you're one of those people who you think you have more medicines than you need, then you may need to make an appointment with your doctor, and you need to say to them, I'm going to need some extra time with my doctor, because I want to go over all of my medications and make sure that I need to be on all of them, or whether some can be discontinued. One of the main barriers to having that kind of a successful conversation is again, a study I have in my book shows that if primary care doctors did everything that was expected of them through the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, CMS, it would take them 26.7 hours per day of work to do everything that was required of them for the patient panel that they have, which obviously doesn't work. So you need to, I would do this. I would go in to your doctor's office on the very next visit and say, doctor, I listened to this crazy guy, Drew, and he said, I need to be more engaged with my healthcare. So I want to start a commitment to be much more knowledgeable about and engaged with all of my health conditions and the medications I'm on. Of course, then you'll have to take a pause and help your doctor back up off the floor into their chair, because they'll be stunned. We are desperate to hear from people that want to be that engaged in their healthcare. We're desperate for it. It's past time to be doing it. Sorry to be so long-winded again.
Thank you. What is the name of your website, or how do people get to it?
I don't have a website, but on my Facebook page is probably the easiest place to go. On my Facebook page, there are plenty of links to different, the link you're going to put at the end, the link to the publisher's website. The good thing now is you don't have to listen to just me, because on the website, there are 8 reviews by advanced readers. So you can say, well, of course, and say, well, what do these 8 people think about having read through Drew's book, and see if it's worthwhile. There's some other talks I've given and links to those. So I'm supposed to create a website. I haven't succeeded at that yet. I have an author page on Amazon, and I have my Facebook page. Occasionally I send things out on Twitter and Instagram, but the Facebook page is probably the most reliable place. My phone number is probably on there too, but I probably wouldn't encourage you to call me, but definitely email me. I'll respond to any email I get. Again, it's pretty easy. Drew Remy, you don't have to even spell Remignanti. Drew Remy at Gmail. There. So the challenge is going to be, how are we going to wrest healthcare back from business interests? I'm not an economist, and I was on the verge of trying to address that in my book, and it was talked down from it by some physician friends and said, Drew, you open that can of worms, you're going to have to write another couple hundred pages, and that might distract from your main message. So, how do we address inequity in American society? And I think probably 2 ways we're going to have to do it in the U.S. We're going to have enough people convinced that we have to change things, and enough people who've established this partnership with a primary care doctor saying, the first thing I would do a couple of things. I would stop responding to when you get those press gainy things. what did you think about your healthcare? Evaluate your doctor, evaluate the hospital. What they do with that information when they get it is like they roll it up like a newspaper that you take to a disobedient dog, and they beat me over the head with it and say, Drew, these people are dissatisfied with your care. And I would say, well, that's because I didn't want to give them an unlimited supply of narcotic pain medications, and I didn't think that antibiotic was necessary. So I would stop answering those satisfaction surveys. And if you have a real concern about the interaction you've had, I'd call and say, I need to speak to the hospital. I need to speak to the CEO of this hospital. You won't get to that person, of course, but make the person who answered the phone justify to you why you won't. And I say, well, you can speak to so-and-so. Well, who is that person? And then you give them an earful saying, look, I sat in the emergency department in the hall for 6 hours, and that's usually because there's too many people in the emergency department than truly need to be there. We need to incentivize primary care in the United States, which was one of the things I was going to start on in my book, but was wisely talked down from. We need to pay, this is not going to be popular here. We need to pay doctors more. We need to pay primary care doctors more, and we don't need to take that money from other doctors in order to give it to the primary care doctors. We need to say, gee, is it a good use of our resources that poor Mr. Bertolini, sorry to raise his name again, but who was in line to get $500 million for a business deal? Is that an appropriate amount of money to be used in that way? I don't think so. But I'm not a socialist. I believe, we all have to take responsibility for our own health care, but we need to reorient our priorities as a society.
Thank you. There's a question, can solo practices survive in this environment?
Primary care doctors will tell you no. And they say it just can't be done because your primary care doctor expected to put in 26.7 hours of work in a 24-hour day. And so it used to be that the bulk of primary care practices were solo practices owned by the physician. Now solo practices owned by the physician are in the minority now. They're not, I have some stats on it in my book, but I can't pull them up now. And it's understandable because you have these private equity companies that said, we'll buy your practice, we'll pay you such and such a salary. You don't have to worry about billing. You don't have to worry about this, that, and the other thing. But you do have to work your tail off, and you need to see a new patient every 15 minutes, which is an absurd idea. So people take the easy way out, and they sell their practice because it's a good business decision, and they put up with it for as long as they can, and it's leading to many doctors retiring earlier than they might have preferred to do. I managed to last a whole 40 years, which I was impressed by, that I stayed that long. But it was nip and tuck at the end there, whether I would burn out or whether I would be fired for saying the type of things I'm saying now. But I managed to make it to the end without getting fired. I was pleased by that.
Can you comment on the COVID vaccine? Was it necessary or mostly a profit-making strategy?
Wow. When the COVID vaccine came out, I was retired, and I thought, gee, this is going to be tough. What is this mRNA stuff? And so I was a little leery. I was happy that I was retired because other people would be getting it before me, and those selfless individuals who volunteered to be part of trials were brave souls. I'm fully vaccinated and boosted up the yin yang, but what I did when I did my own investigation of it was that the mRNA technology it was not brandy new. I mean, it was being used in cancer treatment. So, what was happening is what they said would happen. The mRNA would enter the cell. It doesn't interfere with your DNA. It just guides the cell to make antibodies to the spike protein, and then the mRNA just goes away. It's not a permanent part of your DNA for the rest of your life. So it was a new technology for vaccination, but it was not a new technology. It had been used in cancer care for, I hesitate to say, I think it was at least a decade. So I was leery about it, but I was also seeing the statistics, which was people who were vaccinated, some were getting side effects, yes. but the number who were getting myocarditis was the big side effect people were jumping up and down about. But when you look at the numbers, people who were getting COVID were having greater rates of myocarditis than people who were getting the vaccine. On the flip side, there was a little bit of goalpost moving, because the goal of a vaccine is to keep you from getting the illness at all, getting the infection at all. And the COVID vaccines don't do that. You can still contract the infection. You just get less sick with it. You're less likely to be hospitalized. You're less likely to die. You're less likely to have to go on a ventilator. So it's a partially effective vaccine. Not ideal, but it's partially effective. And I'm a huge believer in vaccines anyway. But certainly there was no conspiracy going on. I was involved in the healthcare system for 40 years, pretty intimately involved. And let's conspire against patients and make money off them is not a physician attitude. There are some bad actor physicians, and I address that in my book. But let's make a profit off patients is a concern of business people. It's not a concern of physicians. Of course, you want to have an effective practice that doesn't go out of business. But my conclusion, after being exposed to dozens of physicians who were my own doctor and working with probably thousands of physicians over my 40 years, I didn't meet a single physician for whom I didn't think getting it right on behalf of the patient was priority number one. Occasionally, we might lose track of that momentarily. I did myself a few times, where when you're pulled in different directions, you might do something that in retrospect you say, well, I should have done that a little bit better. But practicing physicians are committed to doing what's right for the patient. It's just plain the fact. And you need to find one who you can communicate with and trust and get to know, and be confident they get to know you. Those doctors are not rare. The rare doctors are the ones that lose track of that.
I think that's all of our questions. So thank you so much again, Dr. Remignanti, for that really
You're welcome.
Interesting talk.
Thanks for the opportunity, and please, whoever's still hearing, write me an email and say, that you were way off base there, Drew, or you forgot to think of this or that or the other thing. I'd love to hear it. It's too late to appear in this book, but when I give promotional talks for my book, if you're giving me an insight about where I might have been off, that would help me. So don't think you're going to offend me if you don't agree with me. A great quote in the Baha'i faith is, the shining spark of truth only arises after the clash of differing opinions. So we have to have differing opinions in order to get to the truth. Mm-hmm. I'm eager to hear differing opinions.
Great, thank you. Yeah, well, definitely. I put your email in the chat so people can reach out if they have any comments or questions. So our speaker next week is Dr. Steve Worth, and his topic is Humanity's Coming of Age, Implications for Individuals, Communities, and Institutions. So if you're not on our mailing list, I'll put the link to that in our chat right now. Thank you, everyone. Have a good week. Bye.